Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is round one from the 2014 FIDE Candidates tournament between Vishy and Anand, who's playing the white side, and Levon Aronian. The winner of this 14-round tournament, which is being held in Khanty-Mansiysk, Russia, will act as the challenger to Magnus Carlsen for the next World Chess Championship match. So let's see exactly what took shape in this one. Game opens with e4. We go into a Ruy Lopez. And there's an invitation after castles for the Berlin with knight takes e. That's declined, bishop e7 instead. And after castles, if Anand chooses c3, we would almost certainly have the Marshall Gambit being played, something Aronian has played many a times, and good success with it, good experience with it. This is declined, however. h3 instead, a useful, purposeful move. Purposeful in that it prevents bishop g4 ideas. Just citing one line, if d6, this idea of a central expansion with c3 and d4, well, before you play d4, guess which move is a prerequisite? It's this h3 advance, preventing a pin against your knight, and as a result, one that would stop black from resolving the tension in the center. So that it's useful in that sense, it's purposeful in that sense. You could also reason it's a waiting move. Let's see exactly what black's going to do on their move 8 before I decide on what I'm going to do with, let's say, these pawns. Maybe I'll play c3 with this d4 idea in mind, or maybe I'll baby step it. Maybe I'll just play d3. Bishop b7 is played. The bishop's now on the longest diagonal. Here comes d3, paving the way for the bishop, and now still in the spirit of the Marshall Gambit comes d5, offering up the e5 pawn. Takes, and this pawn could be taken right now, but is not. Keep in mind that black is deficient with development, right? No queenside pieces have moved just yet, and while this pawn could be taken, well, keep in mind there is some drawback. You're not focusing on development. You're just going to win material. Pawn hunting. White wants to get in some more development. Knight b to d2 is played. If this pawn is up for grabs, maybe one move later, maybe it'll be taken. It is still up for grabs. Queen d7 is played. Black is now fully developed. It is taken at this point. Knight takes, rook takes, knight f6. Black is down material, but in exchange for it has a lead in development. The rooks are already connected. Anticipating the rook being kicked with bishop d6, the rook voluntarily retreats. Rook a to e8, knight f3. Sure enough, the bishop is playing here, and now bishop to e3. If you're wondering at all about maybe first exchanging and then doing something with your bishop, let's say to e3, keep in mind what you are doing. You are helping black to do what? Activate a rook that is currently inactive, right? This rook is exactly where it would want to be. So do not help black. Instead it is bishop e3 right away. And now the idea is to simply double on the e-file. There's a lot of pressure. I was talking about black having, as compensation for being down a pawn, black having a lead in development, but you could also look at it as having very well-coordinated, well-placed pieces. These bishops do well on adjacent diagonals, both pointing at the white king side. So too is the queen. The rooks are functioning on these kingside squares directly or indirectly, and maybe the knight is just a move away from causing the white king a headache. There's a lot of pressure against the white king position, and how exactly to alleviate it. The most natural square for the white queen is d2, and then white is fully developed. But there's a significant drawback. You're just smashing open your own king side. And, well, where else do you go with your queen? You go here, you're putting your queen right into the line of fire. You don't want to go there. Your bishop's now in a pin. It's not the move to go with. So what do you do exactly? Because the knight has pressure on it, the queen has to babysit the knight, and you don't want to do that. Keep in mind one of the strategies or concepts you have available to you, one of the plans you have available to you when you're up material is to simply give some of it back. And that's what we see employed in this game. Anand gives that pawn back, and we'll see what exactly it is in exchange for soon enough. d4 is played, and the idea is to create now an outpost for the knight on e5. He will be jumping there in short order. The rooks get doubled. c3 reinforces the strong point on d4. It also opens a new idea maybe for the bishop. H6, you could reason, is a flight square for the king, and it also takes away some squares from these minor pieces, although I don't know if the knight would really have any great point to playing to g5. The bishop, maybe I could see putting some pressure on the knight. It is at this point Anand simply follows through with knight to e5, and if you're looking for maybe one way to, to do something different instead of h6, in hindsight and in anticipation of knight to e5, maybe we could have had queen to f5 being played. As it turns out in this game, after h6, the knight jumps in, he gets taken, the pawn is given back, and at the end of it, white has the bishop pair and the queens are long gone, and as a result, there's no more pressure against the white king. King safety is not an issue. However, maybe instead of h6, the queen could play here, and yes, the knight could still play here. I'm not so sure it would even need to be taken right away, but let's just say it is. The main point I wanted to draw your attention to is that the queen is at least still around on the board to cause the king maybe some problems. In the variation after h6, the queens are off the board, the material is given back, and now we're in an endgame with what exactly? The bishop pair in an open position. So the pressure was neutralized because of the material given back, because of the pieces that are exchanged, the most powerful one, the queen in particular. So how to put these guys to use, how to get these bishops rolling and doing one better. So let's see. First, we get off of the e-file so that the bishop can go elsewhere. The knight repositions, looking at the d5 square. One move you might find quite common is a4, so that after these are exchanged, this file is opened up, and you could maybe get to that 7th rank. A very common move to see at this point would be not at this point, but just in general, like a rook pawn challenging a knight pawn, or in this case the a pawn challenging the b pawn. But what it doesn't address is what? It doesn't address this particular move. If a4 is played, notice what black has available. Bishop d5, attacking the bishop. That might not seem like such a big deal, right? Because it could move away. Right? White wants to keep the bishops, is not so welcome to having light square bishops, but black could be persistent. Where are you going? Wherever you go, I could challenge it. We're either going to have a repetition of position, or the light square bishops are going to come off the board. With the bishop pair on the board, if you ask the rooks, which color complex do you feel most comfortable on, they don't have a good reply to it because they simply don't know, because white could hit the rook regardless of what color square it's on. But if we have the light square bishop exchange happening, let's say it happened in this manner, now if you ask that same question to the rooks, they're going to say the light squares. I feel comfortable there because you don't have to worry about a bishop hitting the rook or attacking the rook. There's finally a color complex black can rely upon. Black would really like to exchange light square bishops as a result. a4 does not address this idea, but c4 does. There would be no bishop d5 clearly in this case. Maybe it could happen now, or maybe not, because you're dropping a pawn, so it's not so easy. And it really isn't easy. If you just take a look on the right-hand side, these clocks give you some indication of time spent on each move. Currently, Aronian has about 64 minutes, and his reply, c6, took about 40 minutes. So it's really a difficult position for black to come up with anything constructive, how to improve upon the position. This bishop is awesome, cannot be challenged. The squares that the knight could try to kick it are guarded clearly. If you're capturing like this, I've talked previously about exchanging. It would be a really good idea for one to exchange an unhealthy pawn for a perfectly healthy pawn. If we look at the two structures, the white and black structure on the queen side, both have pretty good structures, a pawn island of 3 on the white and black side. If we get a little bit more technical about it, this central pawn of this pawn island of 3 is probably the most valuable, because if it's no longer around, for example, after this capture, what do we have? We have the pawns being split, whereas black still has a pawn duo. A healthy structure for white, an unhealthy one, and more accessible one. Because they are split, they are more accessible and vulnerable to the white pieces. The white pieces will have an easier time attacking them this is probably the most it's most commonly seen in this form right here, the bishop putting pressure on a6, if this capture does in fact occur. It is not played, however. It is not the capture on c4, instead c6. If takes now, we could have this, and these guys stay here, but there is still yet another open file for these rooks. But we don't have that capture. Anand is not doing this move. Instead, getting another piece into play, keeping this tension, knowing that this pawn really doesn't have a good decision, however you look at it, right? If you want to avoid this particular capture and play b4, I was talking earlier about the rooks not having a sense of comfort on either color complex, but so too for the pawns or the knight, right? You play here, one day you're going to have to worry about some pressure on that guy, however you look at it. If he's defended, same thing, you put pressure on the pawn on a5. No color complex is safe for as long as one side has the bishop pair. So the rook drops back, anticipating these sort of captures, defending against the 7th rank. a4 comes, Anand is insisting on this pressure on the b5 square, trying to make this pawn flinch, and he does now. However you look at it, if we have this take, these guys are split, they're still accessible. Something similar in the game like this could come into, could show itself, this rook lift. In the game, it was this capture. And if you're pushing, it's this. He's a potential target. And if you just leave it sitting, let me just make kind of a passing move just to show a structural change. If this sort of thing happens, actually, let me be a little bit more specific. If after this capture, you'd probably want to do it like this. I was just going through that very fast, but maybe this could be annoying. He's now a passed pawn. But just my idea here is just to show the structural change. He's still a target. This rook is now active, and maybe there's a way to sneak behind this pawn and put pressure on it. However you look at it, there's going to be a way for white to be putting pressure on one of these black queenside pawns. So it is takes on this move 25, b takes c. The bishop is there to recapture. The knight wants to kick the bishop. You notice as soon as that pawn isn't there, the knight is jumping right to that central post. The bishop does not want to give itself up, clearly. Don't allow knight takes bishop. What is the alternative? You don't really want to go into this opposite color bishop ending. Keep the bishop pair, in other words. Bishop c5, the rook is hit. The rook is hit again. Where exactly to go? There's a lot of squares covered. You don't want to go here. Can't go here. Very, very limited. Rook to e5. The king can now come into play. This is an endgame. Black doesn't have as easy a time getting his king involved. The bishop is returning to its home square. Maybe looking at these squares over here. It's really, really tough to suggest good moves for black, unfortunately, in this position. These are just really, really dominant pieces. After bishop c8, the idea with bishop f1 is to stay out of the way of, well, to keep cover of e2. The idea is to have a rook lift, rook e3 to b3 to b6. If you do that immediately, you're blocking the bishop's view of e2. So he drops back. And again, just a lot of shuffling on the black side. Unfortunately, again, quite difficult to come up with something good. Rook d3, the knight kicks the rook. He was going to go there anyway. Rook comes over, bishop e3 kicks the knight, bishop d2, and the bishop is hit, and this is a really nice position to highlight the strength of the bishop pair. He's on the bishop on f1, home square. He's doing great things though. He's putting pressure on a6, which is tying down the bishop on c8. The bishop is clearly hitting the rook here, watching over also an entry point on d2. Open position, bishop pair, it's their ideal environment. And a lot of pressure now on the black side. Right here, pressure on this split structure. And after knight to d5, we have bishop takes rook, which is not the cleanest approach to converting this position. A better move would have been to play rook takes c6, and then you give up the bishop pair, but notice the resulting position. You're now up a pawn, and it's going to actually turn out to be even more than that, since the bishop is hit twice on c8, and so too is the pawn. So after bishop to e6, let's just say, we have a completely one position, 2 connected passed pawns, and 0 compensation for black. But the variation chosen is actually still winning, still having white with a lot of pressure on the black position. This current position of the bishop versus knight completely boxed out. The material is still balanced, more pawns have been exchanged, and the bishops just thrive that much more. The bishop is hit, it is defended, this counterattacking move, the knight is hit. Bishop to d7, the knight is now hit again, he's clearly short on squares. The bishop negates the knight's movement. After bishop b5, rook b4, knight to b2, you really don't want to take it just yet because it's going to be one right back after a fork. And so we have first the capture, and now the simple idea to have the king just sneak right over and grab the king, but you just have to be a little bit careful about where exactly you move your king. I must say that my instinct was to play to e2 at this point to try and capture the knight. But keep in mind what move is now available to black. There's this interference move of knight to c4. If he is taken, well, then we would have just the exchange of pieces like so. So you don't want to allow that particular move, knight c3. You want to make sure your bishop is covered, so if knight c3 now, you could take and not have this recapture. So it's king to e3, one accurate move. The threat is to take the knight. If the knight plays here, now you go to e2, and the knight, or king to e2, and the knight has to go back to b2. So in other words, it's king to e3, the rook gives a check, king to d2, the rook pins the bishop, and you don't go here because of a similar idea. The knight interferes with knight c4, so instead it is king c3. This knight is won, and it is at this point that Aronian resigns. There's no good solution, right? You're lost at this point. If knight d1, the king simply drops back, and just how the knight was boxed out when it was on a4, it is also boxed out in this case right here. Really good position to see the bishop dominating the knight like this. Wherever it is on the edge of the board, either bishop is always in a position to do similar things to this knight right here, and he simply has no moves. It's just going to be one. So after king to c3, it is at this point again that Aronian resigned, and that's all for this video. I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.